Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you are having an outstanding day. So today we are diving into an essential topic in web security, that is JWT, or we call it as JSON Web Token. Have you ever logged in a website and wondered how it remembers who you are even after refreshing the page? Well, JWT is likely working behind the scenes to make this happen. In this video, we'll break down JWT step by step to understand how it works, why it's widely used, and even explore some real-time examples. So in this session, we'll cover what is JWT and how does it works. Then we'll cover stateless versus stateful authentication, how they works along with some real world example. Then we'll move to the JWT structure where we understand how JWT is created and its key components. And then we'll cover authentication versus authorization, the key difference with real world or real time example. By the end of this video, you will have a clear understanding of JWT secure web application and what happens behind the scenes when you log in. If you are excited to learn to secure your website and understand the core web security concepts, this video is perfect for you. So let's get started with this security tutorial together. So before diving into understand what is JWT and how it works, it's important to first understand stateful and stateless authentication. It's a two fundamental authentication methods used in web application. So now let's understand what is stateful authentication, or we call it as a session based authentication. In stateful authentication, the server maintains a session for each authenticated user. So assume when a user logs in, the server creates a session ID and stores it in a memory or in a database. The session ID is sent to client typically via cookies and must be included in every request. When user makes a new request, the server checks the session ID which is stored in a session data to verify the authentication. So now let's take an example to understand the stateful authentication. Imagine you are visiting a restaurant. You sit in a table and when you order a food, the waiter remembers your table number and order. Each time you ask something, the waiter refers their notes to know what you previously ordered. This is like a stateful authentication where the server keeps track of your session. So now let's understand what is stateless authentication or token based authentication. So in stateless authentication, the server does not store session data. Instead of creating a session ID, the server generates a JWT token and sends to the client upon login. The client must include the token in every request, usually in the authorization header. The server validates the token without needing to store any session related data. Now let's take example to understand stateless in deeply. We'll take a same example. So now imagine you again go to the restaurant. So every time you order, you must show your receipt because the restaurant doesn't remember you, because the waiter or the restaurant not noted down your orders, or he doesn't remember your table name. So in stateless case, every time you order, you must show your receipt because the restaurant doesn't remember you. If you don't have the receipt, you won't get your order. This is like a stateless authentication whenever or where each request is independent, and JWT is commonly used in stateless authentication. So this is all about the stateful and stateless authentication. Now let's jump in and understand what is JWT. So now let's quickly understand what is JWT or JSON Web Token and how it works. So basically JWT is compact URL or safe token used for securing and transmitting the information between two parties. So if you can see it's divided into three sections. So this one which is in green, the first portion, the second portion is in blue, and the third portion which is in black. So this JWT token is divided into three parts: the first one, second one, and the third one. So basically JWT is a compact URL safe token used for securely transmitting information between two parties for a client and server. It is widely used for authentication. So now why JWT is used? So basically the JWT is a stateless authentication that we have already seen in the example. So stateless authentication means which does not store any session related or the session information on the database or the server. So it allows stateless authentication, meaning server doesn't need to store any session data. It ensures secure communication between two parties by verifying the identity of the user. So now let's understand how this JWT will work. So let's assume once user logs into the web application by providing their credentials. So once user log in, he enters this username and password, and once the server verifies the credentials and if valid, then generates a JWT token. The JWT token is sent to the client and stores, typically it's in local storage or cookies. Then for every new request, the client sends the JWT in a authorization header. Then the servers verifies these tokens without needing to check a database and respond accordingly. This process makes JWT is widely used method for securing API and handling the user authentication very efficiently. So now let's quickly understand the JWT structure. A JWT token consists of three parts separated by dots, if you can see on the screen. So this first section is divided by the dot, the second section which is in black, and the third section which is in blue. So this three section which is mainly divided like an first section, we call it as an header, the first part before the dot. This one contains metadata about the token, includes the type of token which we can mention or that is mentioned in the type of token, that is JWT, and the algorithm that we are using. So currently we are using this HS256, but you can use this by selecting the many or those as per your requirement. You can use these algorithms and make the JWT token. So the currently for the example purpose we using this HS256 algorithm. This is the first section. Then the second section, that is payload, or the second part of the JWT is a payload. So you can see the second part after the first dot. This is the payload where we can send the data. So which stores the claim like user data like ID, role, and expiration time when this token will be expired. Third section is nothing but the signature, where your secret 256 byte long string will be generated using this two function, using this header and the payload. So to encrypt, so basically the encryption algorithm in JWT is nothing but it supports multiple encryption algorithm. As we can say in this drop down, there are multiple algorithms. This is for example, this HES256, then SHA256, and many more. So this is all about the JWT and its structure, how it is divided into three parts like header, payload, and signature that we have already seen, and how it is generated and used in authentication. Now before we wrap up our JWT discussion, there is one more critical topic that we need to cover, that is authentication and authorization. Understanding the difference between these two is essential when working in JWT, as they play a key role in securing application. So let's quickly dive in to understand what is authentication and authorization and how they works in real world example. Now let's understand what is authentication and authorization. So let's first understand what is authentication is. Authentication is nothing but it's a process to verify users' identity when they attempt to log in. For example, imagine you open a Netflix and enter your email and password to log in. What happens in the background? Netflix checks whether your credential matches the record in the database or not. If your credentials are correct, then Netflix confirms your identity to grant you access to your account. This process of verifying who you are is called as authentication. To identify the user, the data that or the username or password that you enter, which is valid or not, this is nothing but the authentication to identify the user. So now let's move to the authorization. Authorization determines what action or resources a user is allowed to access for after authentication. For examples, once you successfully log into the Netflix, you land on the home page where multiple profiles are available on the screen. For example, the guest profile, kids or owner and many more. Now let's say you are logging with guest. You can only access the guest profile. But if you try to open kid profile or owner profile, Netflix will restrict access. Why? Because you don't have required permission to access those profiles. This is nothing but the authorization. You need the authorization to access particular section. For example, the owner profile or the kids profile. This is all about the authorization. So that's all about the JWT and its key components or the important components which is required to understand. So quick recap what we have seen so far. So in this video we covered what is JWT, what is stateful and stateless authentication and what happens behind the scenes with a real-time example. Then we gone through this JWT structure, how this JWT is divided into three categories or three different parts, that is header, payload and the signature, and how this JWT encryption algorithm, how we use those algorithms, and then finally we cover what is authentication and authorization. So this is all about this JWT tutorial. So if you found this video very helpful, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe to support the channel. If you have any questions or doubt, feel free to drop them in the comment section. I'll respond you as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, have a great day.